I was retouching an old class photo from 1962 when I saw something that made the air leave my lungs. Right there, in the middle row, sat a girl smiling faintly, her curls soft, her jawline familiar, the tiny mole near her left eye exactly where mine is. The problem was simple and impossible at the same time. I wasn't born yet. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. The hum of the scanner filled the silence, a mechanical heartbeat pulsing through the room. The smell of dust and fixer chemicals hung heavy, the way it always does when history is being dragged out of its sleep. "Is the scanner glitching?" I murmured, trying to sound calm. My voice cracked anyway. "No, ma'am," said Leo, my 20-something intern. "This is the original film. Straight from the archive." His words slid into me like a cold wire. The monitor light washed over my face, bleaching every wrinkle pale. I leaned closer, closer, then reason allowed, until the pixels broke apart into tiny squares of color. But even then, she was there. That girl, that impossible version of me, frozen in the light of a classroom I'd never stepped into. I could almost smell the chalk dust on her blouse, feel the static of that era's nylon ribbon in her hair. The longer I looked, the more the photo seemed to breathe, like the past itself had been waiting for me to find it. Something inside me tightened, a pulse, a warning. Leo was still talking, but I heard only fragments, the click of his keyboard, the squeak of his chair. Every sound came through water. I pressed 2 fingers to the screen, right over her face. The glass was cool. The girl's eyes met mine through 63 years of chemical emulsion and silence. Who took this photo? And why was my face there? My throat burned. I told myself it could be coincidence. One of those freak genetic echoes you sometimes see between generations. But I had no family to inherit anything from. No mother's cheekbones. No grandmother's curls. I'd grown up in St. Helena's orphan home with nothing but a first name that didn't even belong to me. The cursor blinked over the date at the corner of the digital file. May 3, 1962. For the first time in years, the number meant something other than history. It felt like a door creaking open. I zoomed in again. Behind the girl, behind me, there was a blackboard half erased. Only one chalk line remained, tilted at an angle like a signature that someone had tried to rub out. The girl's hands rested on her knees, fingers folded neatly as if she knew she was being watched. And God help me, she looked, aware. Like she recognized the lens. Like she recognized me. I blinked hard, but the image didn't change. The air in the studio grew dense. The machine stopped whirring. For a second, the only sound was my own breathing. Uneven, heavy, too loud. I felt the tremor start in my fingertips and travel up my arms, the way it did when I used to wake from nightmares I couldn't remember. "Ms. Carter?" Leo's voice sounded far away. "You okay?" I couldn't answer. My tongue felt like paper. The girl in the photo was still staring. Maybe it was just the way light had caught her pupils. Maybe my brain was doing what it always did, trying to make sense of patterns. But deep down, I knew what I saw. It wasn't a resemblance. It was recognition. I straightened, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. "Strange," I said, "how faces repeat themselves." Leo nodded politely, already bored, already moving on. But I stayed there, alone with the image glowing in the dark. Every line of her face was an accusation. Every pixel, a whisper. If I'd never studied there, if I'd never existed in that time, then whose memory was this? The cursor blinked again, waiting. The monitor hummed. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the past looking back at me. I've spent more than 30 years restoring photographs for other people. Weddings, funerals, citizenship papers, portraits of strangers reunited with their youth. For 3 decades, I've been giving everyone else a past, just never myself. Every morning, the smell of developer fluid and warm dust fills my studio. I fix cracks in other people's memories. A missing hand replaced pixel by pixel, a tear in a face healed with digital light. Sometimes, I think the screen has become my mirror, one that only reflects what others want to remember. People bring me photos of fathers who never came home, brides who died too soon, babies they never got to hold. They look at me like I'm performing magic. Can you make her smile again? They ask. I always can, but I can't make her real. The truth is, I don't own a single photograph of my own childhood. Not one. No blurry Polaroid. No birthday candle frozen mid-blow. Nothing. I grew up at St. Helena's Orphan Home on the outskirts of Milwaukee, a building that smelled of chalk, bleach, and prayers. The nuns taught us to sew, to sing, to scrub the marble floor until we could see our faces in it. Faces we didn't recognize. My file at the orphanage said I was born in 1959. No birth certificate, no parent's name. Just one faint line in blue ink, found near the river. Winter night. When I first learned to read, that sentence felt like a spell someone had cast to keep me from asking more. Found. As if I were an object misplaced, then retrieved. As if belonging could be written into existence. Sister Agnes, the head nun, was a small woman with iron hair and eyes soft as candle wax. She carried a flashlight on her belt, a beam that always cut through the dark corridors after evening prayers. Once, when I was 7, she found me crying in the dormitory. The power had gone out during a storm, and the world was nothing but thunder and the smell of wet wood. She knelt beside my bed, tilted the flashlight under her chin and said, "Do you remember your mother, child?" I shook my head. "No, sister." She lowered the light so it glowed against her palm. "Then remember this," she whispered. Light always finds its way back. That was the first time the word light meant safety to me. The flashlight reflected off the tears on my cheeks, and I imagined it was my mother's face, whoever she was, coming to see if I was still breathing. Years later, I realized that light is cruel in its own way. It never stops revealing. When I turned 16, the orphanage sent me out with a suitcase and a blessing. I took a night job cleaning a photo lab downtown. My first encounter with negatives, film strips, contact sheets. I loved how the images emerged slowly, as if the world were being developed in front of me. A man named Henry, the lab's owner, taught me how to hold film by the edges. "The oils in your skin can leave marks that last forever," he said. "Touch only what you intend to keep." Those words stayed with me longer than he did. In college, I studied photographic restoration. Maybe it was my way of fighting the erasure that started before I was born. I built a career out of saving what was almost lost. Faces eaten by mildew, edges torn by war. People called me the memory fixer. I smiled, pretended it was a compliment. Inside, I wondered if fixing memories was just another way of lying to them. I remember one assignment vividly. A widow brought in a faded portrait of her husband from 1943. His eyes had turned to white blurs, his uniform nearly dissolved into the sepia paper. "Please," she begged, "I just want to see him one more time." I spent days repairing the image, pixel by pixel. When I handed it back, she cried so hard I had to look away. She said, "You gave me back the man I lost." But I hadn't given her the truth, only the illusion of it. Maybe that's what I've always done. Turn lies into light. Still, there were moments when my craft felt holy. When an old photograph finally cleared, when an eye reappeared where a shadow had been, I felt something almost divine stir inside me. A flicker that said, "You exist because someone once saw you." But I'd never had that proof for myself. No photograph, no witness, no light that pointed back to me. Whenever people asked about my family, I'd smile and say, "I came with the camera." It was easier than explaining that my entire childhood fit on a single line of ink and an empty envelope. I used to imagine my mother was a photographer too. In my head, she had steady hands and sad eyes. Maybe she'd dropped me by the river with her last flashbulb, hoping the light would lead someone to me. That was the story I told myself whenever the loneliness felt heavier than breath. The first time I tried to find my records, St. Sane. Helena's had already been demolished. I stood at the edge of a parking lot where the chapel used to be, the asphalt still faintly smelling of incense and concrete dust. There was nothing left but a crooked signpost with a rusted plaque. Here stood St. Helena's Home for Children, 1894-1989. I ran my fingers over the words until the metal left gray smudges on my skin. I wanted to dig beneath the asphalt, to pull out the names buried there. But all I found was my own reflection in a puddle, distorted by wind. People often ask why I never married. I tell them I was already wedded to the ghosts in the photographs. The truth is, I was afraid of giving life to another blank page. Afraid of passing down the emptiness, the untraceable beginning. Afraid that one day, my child would look at me and see only a face. No story attached. So I filled my life with other people's stories instead. Every time I clicked restore, I felt a momentary illusion of belonging, as if I were stitching myself into their memories. But nothing lasts forever, not even pixels. The day I found that 1962 class photo, I realized that maybe the light had been circling back all along. Maybe it was never lost, just waiting for me to look directly at it. I went home that night and sat in the dark, the glow from my computer still burning behind my eyelids. I remembered Sister Agnes and her flashlight, the way she'd said, "Light always finds its way back." And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if the light didn't want to save me. What if it wanted to expose me? In my 30s, long before the tremor in my hands and the silver in my hair, I used to travel the country as a freelance photographer. I believed then that images never lie, that the lens was incapable of deceit, only the people behind it were. I chased light the way some people chase faith. Sunrise over deserts, faces in train stations, reflections in windows. My suitcase always smelled of rain and film. I lived out of motels, sending rolls of negatives to magazines that paid in checks I never cashed on time. Looking back, I think I was trying to prove I existed by leaving a trail of photographs behind me. Each click was a small declaration. I was here. One spring, I was hired to photograph a reunion for the graduating class of 1962 from a girls' academy outside Madison. The job sounded ordinary: group portraits, champagne smiles, nostalgia polished for print. When I arrived, the campus was drenched in evening light, that honey-colored hour when everything pretends to forgive you. I remember the ivy on the walls, the smell of lilacs near the chapel, and the loudspeaker that crackled faintly as if still waiting for instructions from a world long gone. Most of the women were in their 60s, dressed in pastel suits and pearls. Their laughter was soft but nervous, the kind that carries both pride and grief. I began setting up my tripod near the old fountain when one of them, tiny, sharp-eyed, with a voice like folded paper, touched my arm. "Oh my goodness," she said, staring at me. "You must be her granddaughter." I blinked. "I'm sorry, whose, Miss Stevens?" "Our literature teacher. You're her spitting image." She clutched her pearls as if they might confirm it. "Same hair, same mouth, you even tilt your head the same way when you smile." I smiled out of politeness, though I could feel something tugging behind my ribs. "I'm afraid I don't know her," I said. The woman frowned, uncertain, then laughed it off. "Well, it's uncanny," she murmured. "You could step into our class photo, and no one would notice the difference." Her words should have slid off me like dust. But they didn't. That night, back in my motel, I uploaded the images. As the screen flickered through the shots, wrinkled faces lit by nostalgia, hands clutching old yearbooks, I kept pausing on the same one, a group standing under the school's stone arch. In the far background, carved into the lintel, were the words St. Nee. Helena's Academy. I froze. The name felt like a bell ringing from somewhere deep in my bones. I turned up the volume on my laptop, and through the faint hum of the air conditioner, I swore I could hear it. The static crackle of an old PA system, a woman's voice echoing through time. Saint. Helena's girls' school, class of 1962. The sound wasn't real, of course. It was memory wearing a disguise. But I could almost smell floor wax and chalk dust again. I tried to brush it off. The next morning I delivered the photos, collected my fee, and drove away. Yet something stayed with me. The way that elderly woman had looked at me, as though she were seeing a ghost who didn't know she was one. For months afterward, I found myself seeking reflections in glass windows and train doors, half expecting to glimpse another version of me standing behind the image. Sometimes, when I edited late at night, my monitor would flicker just before saving, and I'd see a flash of a classroom, desks, uniforms, a chalkboard half erased. Once, in a diner, I overheard two men talking about a historic girls' school that had burned down in the 60s. One said, "They say some of the photos survived, but the names didn't." I remember gripping my coffee cup until my knuckles turned white. Back then, I still told myself coincidences were harmless. I was a woman of science, not superstition. But photography teaches you a cruel truth. Light doesn't just reveal, it remembers. Each image is a trapdoor. Step on it, and you fall straight into another moment. A year later, I left travel work and returned to restoration. Maybe I was tired of chasing other people's stories. Or maybe I was afraid of what might appear next time I looked through a lens. Still, sometimes when I adjusted brightness or exposure, I'd hear that faint PA voice threading through the static in my speakers. St. Helena's Girls' School class of 1962. It was like the past had found the right frequency, whispering through the cables of my computer, reminding me that no photograph ever dies completely. It just waits to be redeveloped. I used to think my youth was the only clean chapter of my life, untouched by questions. But the older I got, the more I sensed it had been rehearsed for me long before I was born. It arrived on a Thursday night, no return address, no postmark, just a plain manila envelope slipped under my studio door. The kind of thing that hums with silence before you even touch it. Inside were two items: a thin strip of microfilm wrapped in tissue paper, and a single note written in slanted ink that bled through the page. "Don't trust your birth date." That was all. No signature. No explanation. The handwriting looked rushed, almost panicked, as if whoever wrote it was being watched. I turned the envelope over twice, searching for fingerprints that weren't there. The room smelled of chemicals and static, the metallic scent that lingers after lightning. Leo, my intern, was still in the darkroom cleaning trays. "Someone left us at the door," I said, holding up the film. He peeked out, his gloves still damp. "Fan mail?" "Not the kind I want." I fed the microfilm into the old viewer I kept for archival work. The machine coughed, flickered, then cast a bluish light across the wall. Grainy images appeared. Schoolgirls in uniforms, the familiar stone arch of St. Helena's Academy. And there, in the center again, her, the girl with my face. But this time, words were scrawled across the margin in thick black ink. Project Re. Identity. The letters looked official and frantic at once, as if written by someone who wanted to tell the truth before being erased. Leo leaned closer. "Is that the same photo?" "Yes," I whispered. My mouth was dry. "The same. But this version isn't from any archive I've seen." He frowned. "Maybe it's a hoax." "Maybe," I said, though the word felt heavy, dishonest. I printed a still frame. The caption beneath the image was stamped with a government seal, blurred but unmistakable. "Property of U.S. Health and Human Research Division, 1962. The sound of the projector deepened, almost like breathing. I could feel the pulse of electricity through the metal casing. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to keep this reel hidden. Someone else wanted me to find it. Leo rubbed his temples. Who would even have something like this? "Someone who knows I used to be part of it," I said before I could stop myself. He stared. "Used to be part of what?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Or maybe I did. And the knowledge was just waiting for the right frequency to surface. That night, I sat alone with the projector running on a loop. The film hissed softly as it spun, whispering secrets in Morse code. Each rotation seemed to pull me closer to something I couldn't name. On the wall, the classroom flickered again and again. Dozens of girls frozen in the same half-smile, their eyes blurred into anonymity. Only mine, or hers, remained sharp. In one frame, a figure stood in the corner, an adult, face obscured by light flare. I paused there, leaning forward until the machine hummed against my ear. The outline of the person looked feminine. Maybe a teacher. Maybe the Miss Stevens that old woman had mentioned. Or maybe it was someone else entirely. The film popped, a small burst of smoke curling upward. I killed the power. The sudden silence was violent. Leo called from the dark room. "Everything okay?" I forced a steady tone. "Just an old reel. It's falling apart." He laughed lightly, like the rest of us. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The smell of burnt acetate clung to my palms long after I washed them. I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. A prank. A collector's mistake. Maybe even a forgotten film, mislabeled in some government auction. But at 3 in the morning, I found myself digging through my own file from St. Helena's. The line that once seemed meaningless, found near the river winter night, now pulsed like a warning I'd failed to hear for 67 years. The microfilm still sat on my desk, coiled like a sleeping serpent. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. Part of me was terrified it might disappear before I learned what it wanted to say. Another part feared it would tell me something I couldn't live with. When I finally turned off the lights, the projector's lens kept glowing faintly, like an eye refusing to close. The invitation arrived printed on thick ivory paper, embossed with gold. "The Museum of Midwestern History cordially invites you to the opening of Women of 1962. A generation reborn." I almost didn't go. I told myself it was another coincidence, another photograph from a time that had nothing to do with me. But curiosity is a cruel disease for anyone who's lived her life chasing truth through lenses. So I went. The museum smelled of varnish and money-polished wood floors, champagne bubbling behind glass flutes, soft music playing from invisible speakers. The walls gleamed with black and white portraits of women in crisp uniforms and hope-heavy smiles. At the far end of the gallery, beneath a banner that read, "The Class of '62, hung the photo. Enlarged. 2 meters wide. Every pore, every curl, every molecule of dust now monumentalized under perfect museum lighting. And right there in the middle of it was my face. I froze. The chatter around me blurred into static. Flashbulbs popped for other people's cameras, the sound biting at my ears like insects. The museum director, Dr. Halvorsen, tapped the microphone at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice smooth as lacquer. "This image represents the first post-war generation of women who dared to dream of education, equality, and purpose. It is, quite literally, the face of resilience." Laughter. Applause. And then, as if fate were toying with me, he added, "We are honored to have Ms. Marilyn Carter, renowned photo restoration artist, in attendance tonight. She helped us prepare this very image for exhibition." Dozens of heads turned toward me. The spotlight found me like a sniper's beam. A reporter with a press badge pushed forward. His camera hung from his neck, ready like a loaded weapon. "Ms. Carter," he called out, "is this your mother?" My mouth opened, but no sound came. The question seemed absurd, yet painfully reasonable. It would have been easier to lie, to nod, to vanish into some invented lineage. Instead, I felt the words rise from somewhere below the ribs. Uninvited, unstoppable. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly, "that's me." For half a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room exhaled. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of heels shifting against marble. The reporter frowned, uncertain whether he'd heard correctly. "You mean, you resemble her?" I swallowed hard. "No. I mean, it is me." The photographer next to him lifted his camera. Click, click, click. Light exploded across my face. Every flash felt like another decade peeling away. Someone muttered, "Is she joking?" Another voice, "She wasn't even born then." A woman laughed too loudly, the kind of laugh meant to slice through tension. I heard the curator whisper to the director, "Do we have security on standby?" It might have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. I wanted to explain, to tell them about the orphan file, the microfilm, the note that said, "Don't trust your birth date." But even to my own ears, it sounded like the beginning of madness. The reporter stepped closer. "So you're saying this photo is a fabrication?" "No," I said. "I'm saying I don't understand it either." The flash went off again. I could feel my heartbeat echoing inside my skull. The room tilted. colors flattening into grayscale like the photographs around me. For a second I thought I might faint, but a strange steadiness held me upright. The same stillness I'd practiced in dark rooms for years, waiting for images to appear. That was when I noticed something no one else seemed to see. In the bottom corner of the giant print, there was a faint marking, an almost invisible stamp half covered by glare. Property of Project RE, identity. My stomach dropped. I reached out before thinking, fingertips brushing the edge of the canvas. The guard moved closer, clearing his throat, but I didn't care. The texture under my skin was real, the kind that refuses to stay buried. The director tried to smooth the moment over. "Ah, art has a way of reminding us how interconnected history is," he said into the mic, forcing a chuckle. "Faces recur, patterns repeat, perhaps mispresenses. Carter simply carries a resemblance that—" No. My voice cracked through the room like glass breaking. "That's not resemblance, that's replication." Every head turned again, cameras raised. The air thickened. Afterward, I can only remember fragments. The crowd parting, the cold flash of reporters' lenses, the museum lights stabbing down from above. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass frame beside the photograph, and for an instant, I saw the other girl. Myself, younger, impossible, staring back. Her lips curved, almost smiling. I whispered to the reflection, "Who are you?" No answer. Only the mechanical symphony of shutters clicking, documenting the exact second I began to unravel in public. When I finally stepped outside, the winter air hit me like truth. Sharp, undeniable. The museum glowed behind me, each window pulsing with artificial light. Somewhere inside, that photograph would hang for months, my face frozen in a history I'd never lived. I should have felt humiliated. Instead, I felt stripped bare, like someone had peeled the film from my life and projected the negative for everyone to see. Maybe that's what exposure really is. Not revelation, but surrender. I didn't sleep after the exhibition. Every time I closed my eyes, flashes went off behind my eyelids, the rhythm of cameras, the light swallowing my face. By dawn, my email inbox was filled with headlines. Woman claims to be girl in historic 1960 photo. Marilyn Carter, and the mystery of the reappearing face. I read none of them. I already knew what they said, that I'd lost my mind, that I was desperate for attention, that I'd mistaken resemblance for reincarnation. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had lost my mind. But if madness is the only way to reach the truth, I'd rather go insane with purpose. I went back to the studio before sunrise. The microfilm was still there on the desk, coiled like a black worm. I fed it again into the scanner, this time tracing every code, every number imprinted along the frame. Near the bottom edge of one reel, I noticed it. Tiny white text that almost dissolved under magnification. File, A option. Program 1962, Subject M. C, my initials. My breath hitched. It couldn't be coincidence. There were millions of names in the world, millions of letters. But not this pairing, not attached to a face that wasn't supposed to exist. I stared until the letters blurred into lines. Then I wrote them down, over and over on a scrap of paper. MC 1962. Each time I wrote it, it looked less like code and more like a confession. By afternoon, I'd convinced myself there had to be record somewhere. If Project RE identity was real, it had to live inside a government archive. I pulled on my coat, tucked the note into my pocket, and drove downtown to the Municipal Records Building. The clerk behind the counter was young, polite, bored. I asked for files related to Adoption Program 1962. He frowned. "That's not a public archive, ma'am. It's classified under Health and Human Research." "Health and Human?" I repeated. He shrugged. "Probably some old medical study. You'd need clearance to even see the index." I thanked him, smiled, and walked away. But I didn't leave. When the hallway emptied, I followed the sign marked Restricted Archives. Sub-Level B. The air grew colder, heavier, each step echoing like a heartbeat down the cement corridor. My shoes squeaked against the floor, absurdly loud. At the end of the hall stood a gray metal door sealed with a plastic tag marked, "Do not remove. Federal hold." My fingers hovered above it. I could hear Sister Agnes's voice somewhere in the back of my mind. Light always finds its way back. Well, maybe it needed help this time. The tag snapped with a sound sharper than it should have been. The door creaked open, exhaling 50 years of dust. Inside, rows of filing cabinets, pale green and forgotten, humming faintly under fluorescent light. A smell of paper and mildew hit me like memory itself, stale and persistent. I scanned the drawers until I saw one labeled, Adoption, 1960-1963. My pulse quickened. The lock was rusted, but a screwdriver from the maintenance shelf nearby did the job. The drawer slid open with a groan. Inside were dozens of slim manila folders, each with a code stamped in red ink. I thumbed through them, AA, B, F, LD, and then MC. I froze. The folder was thinner than I expected. Inside lay only 3 items: a birth record form, blank, except for a blacked-out section where parents' names should be. A photograph of a baby wrapped in a silver emergency blanket. A form stamped Transfer to Project Re-Identity. January 1962. My own handwriting trembled as I touched the paper. Transferred. Like cargo. Like a product. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, Subject MC, found near river, winter night. The same words from my orphanage file. Same phrasing. Same pen. My throat closed. It wasn't coincidence. It was a copy. The sound of footsteps echoed outside. I froze, holding my breath. A flashlight beam swept across the hallway, security. I slipped the photograph into my coat pocket, returned the folder, and eased the drawer shut. The metal whispered back into place like it was forgiving me for breaking it. When I finally stepped outside, the cold hit me like a revelation. The city lights were flickering on windows, glowing one by one, tiny witnesses to my theft. I walked until the adrenaline dulled, until my lungs hurt. Then I sat on a park bench and pulled out the photo again. Under the yellow streetlight, the baby's face was barely visible, only the curve of a cheek, the shadow of an eyelash. I whispered to the photo, "Is that you?" And immediately corrected myself. "No. Is that me?" The silence had no mercy. That night, I placed the photograph on my work table. I turned off every light except the one from my scanner. The beam washed over the image, bright as revelation. Lines appeared that I hadn't noticed before. Tiny numbers etched into the edge of the photo paper. Frame 28, St. Helena's. It wasn't just a hospital photo. It was taken at the school that shouldn't have had infants at all. Every truth I'd been handed unraveled at once. My orphanage, my age, my name. All built from the same negative. I laughed, softly at first, then harder, until it turned into something closer to a sob. "If I don't capture the truth myself," I whispered, "they'll capture it for me." The light from the scanner pulsed against the wall like a heartbeat. I picked up my camera, the same Leica I'd used my entire career, and pointed it not at the photo, but at the mirror across the room. The shutter clicked. The sound echoed through the studio, clean and final. For the first time, I wasn't recording anyone else's history. I was documenting a crime, the theft of a life. Later, I printed that self-portrait and pinned it to the wall beside the baby's photograph. 2 faces. One beginning, one ending, staring at each other through 60 years of silence. I didn't know yet who had done it, or why, or what Project Re-Identity truly meant. But I knew what I had to do next. Break the rest of the locks. Because some truths don't belong in archives. They belong in daylight. The email from the museum arrived at dawn. A single line, polite and poisonous. "Ms. Carter, you are hereby placed on temporary leave until the investigation regarding the 1962 photograph is concluded. No signature, no apology. Just the weight of bureaucracy pressing delete on my existence." By noon, the news had already spread. The tabloids loved the story. An aging photo restorer claiming to be the girl in a historic image. They called me the woman who stepped out of her own picture. On social media, my face was everywhere, cropped, filtered, mocked. Some thought I was a con artist. Others thought I was a ghost. No one thought I was telling the truth. I stopped answering the phone. The ringing reminded me too much of the projector's hum. The same rhythm, the same insistence. I spent my days inside the darkroom, where the red light made the world mercifully unreal. Shadows bled into one another. Time slowed down. Here, under the chemical glow, I could still believe that images didn't lie. That maybe it was the rest of the world that was out of focus. The air smelled of vinegar and silver nitrate. I'd grown used to it. Comforted even. It smelled like control, like creation. But that day it smelled like confinement. I turned the red bulb toward the mirror and stared. Under that light, everything looked half true. My eyes gleamed crimson. My skin washed to paper. Half woman, half negative. Leo showed up anyway. He had a key. "Don't you ever sleep?" he asked, his voice soft, uncertain whether to joke or apologize. I didn't look up from the developing tray. "Not lately." He hesitated, stepping closer, the soles of his sneakers squeaking against the tiles. "The museum called me. They said you're suspended." "I'm aware. They're saying you tampered with the exhibit files, that you forged evidence." I smiled, but it felt wrong on my face. Let them say what they need to. Lies photograph better than the truth. Leo frowned. "You could stop all this, you know. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." I set the tongs down slowly. The metal clicked against the tray. "I've lived 67 years under a misunderstanding," I said. "I'm done helping it breathe." He studied me for a moment, worry clouding his boyish face. "You're shaking." I looked at my hands. He was right. They trembled, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline, the kind that comes before creation or collapse. "Marilyn," he said quietly, "are you sure you want to keep digging? Some things are buried for a reason." I met his eyes. The red light made him look almost holy. "Leo," I whispered, "I've lived 67 years under someone else's name. What exactly do you think I have left to lose?" He had no answer. Only silence, heavy and alive. When he left, I sat in the dark room listening to the door click shut. The city outside was already awake. Horns, sirens, the distant whir of life moving on without me. But inside, only the drip of water from the rinse tank marked time. I thought of Sister Agnes and her flashlight, how she promised light would always find its way back. I wondered what she would think now, if she'd call this pursuit faith or blasphemy. I tilted my head toward the ceiling, where the ventilation fans spun lazily. The rhythm matched my heartbeat. Slow. Relentless. Waiting. Later that night, I developed the photograph I'd stolen from the archive, the baby wrapped in silver blanket. As the image surfaced through the chemical bath, the lines of the blanket shimmered, glinting like armor. For the first time, I noticed something I hadn't before. In the background, a blurred shadow of an adult leaning over the infant, the shape of a cross on the wall behind them. I touched the paper edge carefully, afraid it might disintegrate under the truth. "Who took this picture?" I whispered into the dark. The air didn't answer, but the red light flickered, just once, like a camera flash from somewhere behind me. Outside, rain began to fall. Each drop on the window sounded like a heartbeat hitting glass. I pulled the shades tighter. There is a stillness that comes after discovery, but before consequence. The eye of a storm you can almost pretend isn't moving. That's where I live now, in the narrow calm between knowing and being known. My resignation letter sat half-typed on the desk. I couldn't bring myself to finish it. Maybe I still hoped they'd realize I wasn't lying. Maybe I was waiting for permission to stop pretending. Either way, the quiet was temporary. I could feel it. Somewhere out there, someone else knew exactly what I'd found. And they weren't going to let me keep it. I asked for the meeting myself. They called it a press briefing, but we all knew it was a containment strategy, an attempt to cauterize the rumor before it infected the museum's donors. The invitation list read like a battlefield map. The museum director, Dr. Halvorsen, 3 board members, the head of public relations, and 2 men in dark suits whose names no one spoke aloud. The press had been tipped off too. Reporters were already circling the lobby like vultures waiting for someone to bleed. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a single leather portfolio and the camera that had started my career. If they were going to erase me, I'd leave a negative they couldn't burn. The conference room was all glass and chrome sterile, expensive, a place designed to make guilt look professional. Halvorsen was pacing near the podium, his tie loosened just enough to imply humanity. When he saw me, his smile froze mid-gesture. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice clipped. "I thought we'd agreed to take some time off." "I'm taking it," I said, "right here." One of the board women crossed her arms. "This isn't an interrogation, you understand? We're simply clarifying your statement." "Then clarify away," I replied. "Who took that 1960 class photo?" A silence, thin as glass. Halvorsen's eyes darted toward the PR woman. She cleared her throat. "Unfortunately, our archives don't include that level of detail." The photographer was anonymous. I set my portfolio on the table. The latch clicked like a trigger. "Then allow me to identify her." From the folder, I pulled 2 prints, the official museum enlargement, and the restored scan I'd created from the microfilm. I laid one on top of the other, and aligned the edges. The same freckles. The same faint scar near the hairline. When the light from the overhead projector hit the surface, the 2 faces merged perfectly. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras whirred. A young reporter stood up. "Are you suggesting the image was fabricated?" "I'm suggesting it was manufactured," I said. "And someone used my face to do it." Halvorsen slammed his palm on the table. "Enough. You're turning this institution into a circus." I met his glare. "No, doctor. You already built the tent. I'm just refusing to be the exhibit." The PR woman interjected, her smile brittle. "Ms. Carter, surely you understand how extraordinary this claim sounds. Time travel? Identity experiments? Do you hear yourself?" I leaned forward, voice steady. "I hear the hum of an old projector looping lies. I found the original reel, labeled Project Re-Identity. You know what that means?" One of the silent men finally spoke. His accent was federal. "That program was decommissioned decades ago." "You're misunderstanding what you saw." "Then enlighten me," I said. "What was I looking at? A training video? A charity project?" Because the subject file said, "Adoption Program, 1962, Subject M. C." He hesitated a beat too long. Reporters scribbled furiously. The air smelled of adrenaline and toner. Halvorsen tried to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, the museum categorically denies." "Categorically denying history doesn't erase it," I cut in. "It only develops it slower." The cameras caught the flash in his eyes. The kind of panic-polished men get when their rehearsed lines stop working. "Ms. Carter," he said, lowering his tone. "I'm warning you, if you continue to defame this institution, you'll face legal action." I opened my portfolio again. This time, I slid out a smaller photograph, the infant in the silver blanket. Gasps. Reporters leaned forward like predators scenting blood. "This," I said, "is the original negative. Taken at St. Helena's. Same film stock. Same date code. The same project that produced your so-called historical image." The boardroom filled with whispers. One journalist whispered, "Holy God, she has proof." Halvorsen's jaw clenched. "Where did you get that?" "From a locked federal cabinet labeled, 'Do not remove.'" I met his gaze. "You'd be surprised what people throw away when they think no one's watching." He took a step toward me, voice sharp. "You stole government property." "No," I said. "I reclaimed personal history." For a heartbeat, everything stopped. No sound, no movement, just the whine of the fluorescent lights above. Then the room erupted, questions overlapping, cameras flashing, security stepping forward. "Is this some kind of performance art?" a reporter shouted. "Was there human experimentation?" Another demanded. Someone asked if I was suing. Someone else asked if I was lying. The noise rose until it became a single indistinct roar. I waited for it to crest, then spoke softly, cutting through the chaos. You keep asking if I'm her. The real question is, who made her? The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. Halvorsen finally exhaled. We're done here. He turned to leave, but I stepped in front of him. My hands were trembling, yet my voice didn't waver. You tried to make me a ghost, I said. You built exhibitions out of people who couldn't consent. You turned memory into merchandise. He didn't meet my eyes. You have no idea what you're accusing us of. Don't I? I lifted the baby photo again. I have the same code stamped on both images. Project Re-Identity. You erased names to build narratives that sold tickets. Tell me I'm wrong. He looked past me, to the suits, to the board, to the ceiling, anywhere but to the truth. One of the reporters, braver than the rest, called out, So what does this mean for the exhibit, Doctor? Was the 1962 class portrait falsified? Halvorsen hesitated. That was his mistake. In that pause, the story changed hands. Answer them, I said quietly. He didn't. And silence is the loudest confession. The young reporter turned his camera toward me. So, Miss Carter, if the photo was fake, what will you do now? I looked straight into his lens. The red recording light glowed like an unblinking eye. I'll build the record they tried to erase, I said. If history won't recognize me, I'll make sure it remembers what it did instead. Security escorted me out minutes later, but the damage was done. The footage aired that night on every major channel. Clips of my confrontation replayed endlessly online, each flash, each tremor of my voice dissected and debated. Some viewers called me delusional. Others called me brave. But the frame they froze on, the one that would outlive the noise, was the image of me standing beside the projected photograph, two identical faces overlapping until they became one. Back home, I sat in the dark, watching the broadcast replay on mute. Halvorsen's mouth moved soundlessly behind the ticker headlines. I could almost lip-read the words. False claims, misunderstanding, institutional integrity. But all I saw was fear. I poured a glass of water, my hand still shaking, and set it on the table beside the baby's photo. The reflection of my face wavered in the surface, older, scarred by light. For the first time, I didn't flinch. The truth had finally stepped into the open, and it was wearing my skin. The story spread like mold, slow at first, then unstoppable. Within 48 hours, every outlet had a headline. Marilyn Carter claims to be girl in historic 1962 photo. Hoax or hidden experiment? The mystery behind Project Re-Identity. My phone didn't stop vibrating. Calls from reporters, podcast hosts, conspiracy theorists. Half wanted to interview me. The other half wanted to diagnose me. When I didn't answer, they found my neighbors. Someone even left a Polaroid on my porch, my own front door, shot at midnight. No note. Just that. By the end of the week, my bank card stopped working. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Then the ATM screen blinked red. ACC count frozen. Contact institution. The next day, the museum payroll system erased my employee profile. No records, no retirement fund, not even a tax history. It was as if I'd never worked there at all. I tried to log in to my email. Access denied. A new message appeared in the junk folder, sent from an address that vanished the second I opened it. The 1962 photo does not belong to you. Nothing else. No greeting, no signature, no timestamp. Just that single sentence, centered like a verdict. I stared at it until the screen went black, my own reflection replacing the words. For the first time, I wondered if history could reach through glass and delete a person the way you erase a file. The calls began that night. Unknown number. Always one ring short of voicemail. At 2 a.m., a voice finally spoke. Ms. Carter. It said, calm, male, accentless. For your safety, stop pursuing the matter of Project Re-Identity. I didn't answer. "You're meddling with classified property," the voice continued. "There are files you were never meant to see. What kind of property uses my face?" I asked. Silence, then a soft click. Line dead. The next morning, Leo showed up, pale and shaking. "They called me too," he said. "Told me to stay away from you or I'd lose my scholarship." He slid an envelope across my kitchen table. Inside were photos. Paparazzi shots of me at the museum, cropped close, eyes half closed, mouth open mid-sentence. Stamped on the back, confidential. Internal. Use only. "Where did you get these?" I whispered. "They mailed them to my dorm. No return address." He swallowed. "What's happening, Marilyn?" I wanted to tell him I didn't know. But part of me did. When people start erasing your paper trail, it's because you've walked too close to theirs. That afternoon, I drove to the storage unit where I kept my old film reels. Someone had broken the padlock. Inside, the boxes were rearranged. Careful, methodical. Nothing stolen. Just touched. Like someone had wanted me to know they'd been there. I found one roll unspooled across the floor, the strip glinting in the dim light. Every frame was blank except one. In the center of that single image was a hand, holding a flashlight. The beam pointed straight at the camera. My throat tightened. Sister Agnes. Light always finds its way back. Or maybe it finds its way in. By now, the media frenzy had turned feral. Talk shows debated whether I was part of a forgotten Cold War cloning project. A columnist called me the living hoax of American memory. I tried not to read, but curiosity is a narcotic. Each article felt like watching my own obituary being rewritten by strangers. The worst were the comments. Hundreds of people arguing over whether I looked aged right to be the girl in the photo. Some compared ear shapes and jawlines, as if anatomy could serve as absolution. It was strange, being both overexposed and erased. Everyone was looking at my face, no one was seeing me. Then, the message came, hand-delivered, slipped under my door in a plain envelope. Inside was a single photograph. The 1962 class photo again, but altered. Every face had been crossed out in red marker except mine. Below, a typed note, "Cease all public claims. Or next time, the red line goes through you." I felt the blood drain from my hands. The photo trembled between my fingers, its paper soft with age, warm from fear. For the first time, I considered leaving, changing my name again, disappearing the way I'd once been disappeared. But where does someone without a beginning go to hide? The following night, Leo called in a panic. "They're saying you doctored the files. The museum released a statement. They've turned everything against you." On the evening news, Dr. Halvorsen appeared, pale and rehearsed. "We regret that Ms. Carter's personal struggles have led to false claims. The museum supports only verified history." Behind him, the photograph hung again, cropped, brightened, and captioned, "Anonymous Class of 1962. I laughed out loud. A cracked, bitter sound. They hadn't destroyed me. They'd reclassified me. At midnight, I heard a car idling outside my window. When I looked, the headlights cut off. A figure stepped out, left a small package on the curb, and drove away. Inside the box, my old Leica camera smashed. The lens shattered, the body dented, but a strip of tape clung to the top. Written in thick black ink, "Stop shooting what isn't yours." I held it in my lap for a long time, tracing the cracked metal with my thumb. That camera had been my witness, my proof that light could tell the truth. Now it was broken, like a mouth sealed shut. The next morning, I went to the police. They listened politely, filed a report, promised to look into it. One officer asked if I had any enemies. "Only history," I said. He didn't smile. When I left, I caught him whispering to his partner, "That's the photo lady." I realized then that once the world names you a story, it stops believing you're a person. I began saving everything to physical film again. Negatives hidden in the lining of my coat, copies mailed to a P.O. box in another state. If they were going to erase me, I'd make them work for it. Leo insisted on helping. He set up encrypted drives, burned backup discs, labeled everything Mother Light so no one would guess. I told him to walk away before it swallowed him too. He said, "You already taught me that the truth has to be developed in darkness first." His faith frightened me more than their threats. Then came the final blow. I woke one morning to find my apartment door unlocked, though I was sure I'd bolted it. Inside, nothing was missing except the baby photograph. In its place lay a new one, my own face, asleep, taken from the foot of my bed. No flash, no noise, just proof. That was the moment I stopped being afraid and started taking notes. If they wanted a record, I'd give them one frame by frame, time-stamped, undeniable. I set up a new workspace in the basement of an old print shop. Concrete walls, no windows, one red bulb for company. The hum of machines above me blended with my heartbeat. Each night, I transcribed everything, dates, calls, photos, threats. And every morning, another email arrived. The same line each time. "The 1960 photo does not belong to you." No punctuation, no signature. A mantra of ownership, repeated until it sounded like prayer. Oh, they were right about one thing. The photo didn't belong to me. I belonged to it. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed. Leo's name lit the screen, followed by a single message. "You need to see this now." He attached a high-resolution scan file. The subject line read, "Negative. True source." For a moment, I hesitated. My hands hovered above the keyboard, trembling with the familiar rhythm of dread. Then I opened it. The image loaded slowly, layer by layer, pixel by pixel, until the ghost appeared. The 1962 class photo. But this time not the cleaned museum version, not even my microfilm copy. This was the original negative. The grain was coarse, scratches running through the emulsion like scars. But the faces were clear. Too clear. One girl center row, third from the left, had an outline that didn't belong. The exposure was wrong, slightly brighter than the others, the texture of her cheek smoother, newer. Even before Leo messaged again, I saw it. The faint line along her jaw. The ghost seam where one photograph had been fused into another. "Zoom in on frame 27, he wrote. "Look at the right ear." I did. There it was. A tiny curve of imperfection, the same shape as the scar behind my ear. The same scar I'd had since childhood, the one Sister Agnes once called God's fingerprint. My mouth went dry. I touched the spot without thinking, tracing the thin ridge of skin as if comparing myself to the negative. The alignment was perfect. They hadn't just stolen my name. They'd grafted my face onto someone else's memory. Leo called immediately. His voice crackled through the speaker, breathless. "I found it while cross-checking the metadata," he said. "The restoration files from the museum. They didn't match the negatives. Someone recomposited the image years later, then archived it as authentic." "How far back?" I asked. "Earliest edit traces to 1989. But the original file name was coded RED62F. The tag matches the adoption file you found." My pulse thudded in my ears. "So they didn't just erase me from records," I whispered. "They replaced me. Marilyn." His voice softened. "I think they used your photo to cover someone else's." I opened my cabinet of old contact sheets, flipping through decades of my own work. Landscape. Portraits. Self-tests. One frame stopped me cold. A photo I'd taken at 24 when I'd first learned self-timer shots. Same pose, same tilt of the head, same faint half-smile. It was impossible, and yet there it was. The exact source image they'd stolen from me. They had pulled it from my own archive, reversed it, smoothed the shadows, and inserted it into the 1960 frame. An identity stitched from theft. My own art had become the forgery that erased me. I couldn't stop laughing. It came out brittle, uneven, half hysteria, half revelation. Leo stayed silent on the other end of the line, letting it happen. When the laughter faded, I said quietly, "They didn't just take my name, they took my face." He exhaled sharply. "Marilyn, this proves everything." "No," I said. "It only proves what I already feared. that I was never meant to exist outside their version of the picture. I printed the negative scan on archival paper. Under the magnifier, the splice mark glimmered faintly. So subtle you'd miss it if you didn't know where to look. But now that I did, I saw the pattern everywhere. Faint repetitions, cloned pixels, light halos where authenticity had been photoshopped before Photoshop existed. Each flaw was an admission of guilt, a confession in code. I thought about the email. The 1962 photo does not belong to you. Maybe they weren't threatening me. Maybe they were reminding me of their ownership, the way art thieves brag about their prizes. To them, I wasn't a person. I was property. The next day, Leo sent another file, a data log recovered from the museum's backup drive. It listed a chain of restorers who had handled the 1962 photograph over the decades. One name repeated 3 times: A. Stevens. I stared at it until my vision blurred. The literature teacher. The woman I'd been mistaken for at the reunion. The woman they said I resembled perfectly. The woman who had disappeared from school records after 1962. Could it be coincidence? Or had Miss Stevens been the original, the template they used to create me? The idea hollowed me out. That night, I returned to the dark room. I pinned the new print beside all the others. The baby in the blanket, the class photo, my self-portrait. 3 lives, 1 face. The red light bathed them all, bleeding truth into every shadow. I whispered to the room, to the walls, to the invisible eyes that might be watching. You didn't just copy me, you built me. Because that was the only explanation left. Somewhere in the machinery of Project Re-Identity, someone had taken fragments, images, DNA, names, and assembled a human composite. A walking replica of a lost girl. Me. When Leo called again, his voice trembled. Marilyn, this goes deeper than the museum. I traced the project tag to an old government contractor. Helix Data Systems. They worked on biometric imaging during the Cold War. How long have they been active? Still are. Just under a different name. I smiled faintly, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. Of course they were. Ghosts never retire, they just update their logos. Send me everything, I said. We're not hiding anymore. Are you sure they're already watching? I know. I glanced at the camera in the corner, the one I'd installed myself for evidence, and smiled. Let them. This time, I'll be the one developing the negatives. By the time the museum announced its 60th anniversary gala, a celebration of truth and heritage, I already knew what I was going to do. They wanted to celebrate history? Fine. I'd give them the real version, the one they buried under 60 years of light and lies. For weeks, I had been piecing together fragments, data logs, film reels, archived memos stamped confidential, every thread that led back to Project Re-Identity. Each night, the walls of my darkroom closed in a little tighter, covered in pinned photographs, strings of red thread, and sticky notes scrawled in the half-light. Leo called it the war room. I called it the proof. I worked methodically, like developing a photograph exposure. By exposure, truth emerging in increments. The microfilm reels Leo recovered from the museum's drive contained degraded footage, but one segment labeled Test Footage 17A was intact. When I first played it, I nearly stopped breathing. A laboratory. Fluorescent lights humming overhead. Rows of children sitting motionless before cameras, each with a number card pinned to their chest. A woman's voice. Clinical and calm. Subject MC successful transfer. Facial reconstruction aligns with donor image. The screen flickered, and for a brief second, a reflection appeared in the lab's observation window. A woman holding a clipboard. Her name tag. A. Stevens. I froze the frame. My heart hammered so violently I could hear it through the speakers. The literature teacher. The ghost of the reunion. She hadn't vanished. She'd been reassigned. Leo stood behind me, pale. You can't show this publicly, he said. It'll ruin them. That's the point, I replied. He shook his head. They'll ruin you first. I turned to him. They already did. 2 weeks before the gala, I tested the museum's audiovisual system. Technicians were rehearsing slideshows and music cues. I volunteered to assist with restoration verification, playing the role of the diligent ex-employee desperate for redemption. No one questioned me. They still underestimated how invisible a woman my age could be. The irony wasn't lost on me. I located the master projector, the one that would play the commemorative film during the gala. It ran on a dual-disc system with a backup feed. A few careful minutes alone with it was all I needed. I replaced the secondary reel with my own. The footage from Project RE, Identity. Encoded. Time-stamped. Unmistakable. As I loaded the reel, I whispered to the machine, "If they want to project history, let's give them something worth remembering." That night, I rehearsed my lines, not for a speech, but for control. The gala would have government officials, donors, journalists. Every major outlet would stream it live. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to let the light speak for me. In the quiet of my apartment, I practiced steadying my hands, breathing through fear. I'd always believed that revenge was loud, but it isn't. It's precise. Like adjusting aperture until the image is razor sharp. On the morning of the event, I dressed simply. Black suit. No jewelry. I wanted no distractions from what mattered. Leo met me outside the museum, his face drawn. "You still have time to walk away." I smiled faintly. "You taught me how to back up the truth. It doesn't need me anymore." He handed me a small flash drive. Just in case they cut the power. Inside were duplicates of every file, digital ghosts ready to haunt the network. Smart boy. The museum gleamed under chandeliers, every inch polished to perfection. Strings played softly. Waiters passed champagne flutes that tasted like money. Dr. Halvorsen stood near the stage, rehearsed smile fixed, his eyes carefully avoiding mine. The banner behind him read, 60 years of legacy. 60 years of light. When he stepped up to the podium, the crowd applauded. He began his speech about preservation, progress, and the enduring power of history. I stood near the control booth, pretending to check the projection alignment. Then came the cue I'd been waiting for. The technician turned to me. "Ready to roll the film?" "Ready," I said. The lights dimmed. The audience hushed. On the giant screen, the museum logo appeared, then dissolved into grain, static, the crackle of old tape. Confused murmurs rippled through the hall. Then came the footage. Rows of children. The sterile hum of the lab. Numbers. Eyes staring blankly into the lens. And the voice. Subject MC. Facial reconstruction complete. Transfer verified. Next batch scheduled for January 1963. Gasps. Someone shouted, "What the hell is this?" The projector whirred louder, refusing to stop. The audience watched, spellbound and horrified, as names and numbers flashed across the screen. Each file stamped confidential. Project Re-Identity. In the final frame, the camera panned across the lab window, capturing the reflection of A. Stevens holding the clipboard, her face eerily calm. Beside her, a girl no older than 5, wrapped in a silver blanket. The same photo that had haunted me all my life. The same scar behind her ear. The room erupted, gasps, whispers, phones snapping pictures. Halvorsen's voice boomed from the stage, frantic. "Cut it off. CUT it off." But the feed wouldn't stop. Leo's backup drive had done its job, looping the footage across every connected screen in the building, every live stream online. I stepped out from the control booth. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. For a moment, the camera flashes mimicked gunfire. I walked slowly to the podium, the footage still flickering behind me. Faces. Names. The stolen generation of Project Re-Identity. Halvorsen's voice cracked. "Marilyn, what have you done?" "Developed the negative," I said. The crowd fell silent. My pulse roared in my ears, but my voice was steady. "You wanted to celebrate 60 years of history. Here it is, the part you edited out." Cameras flashed. Someone applauded once, hesitant, then again, stronger. Others joined. Within seconds, the applause turned to chaos. Some shouting questions, others crying. Halvorsen collapsed into his chair, pale as chalk. I looked up at the screen one last time. The little girl's eyes stared back at me, wide and unblinking. It was like she'd been waiting all this time for someone to turn the lights back on. The screen glowed white for a long second, too bright, too silent, before the image came into focus. At first, people thought it was another archival montage, something artistic, abstract. But then the picture sharpened, and the silence inside the hall broke like glass. Rows of steel tables. Children, bald, barefoot, lined up under blinding lights. A camera clicking in rhythmic bursts. A man's voice counting. One child stepping forward, trembling. Then came the label burned into the frame. PR Object Re, Identity, Facial Mapping Test, 1962. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed. Someone dropped a champagne flute. The sound of shattering glass echoed against marble. And there she was, the little girl at the center of every mystery. Small, naked, staring up at the flashbulb like an animal cornered in light. Her skin glowed too pale under the bulbs. Her eyes wide, confused. On her wrist, a tag that read, MC. Every flash seared her face again and again. Click. 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 The sound filled the entire hall like gunfire. I couldn't breathe. I'd seen this footage in fragments, but never this clearly. Now, projected across a 30-foot wall, the child looked enormous. And impossibly familiar. The scar behind her ear glinted for a fraction of a second. Mine. Screams turned to chaos. People surged toward the exits, some shouting, some filming. The orchestra had stopped playing long ago. Only the projector hummed, steady and merciless. I stepped toward the podium, the microphone still live. Its red light blinked, waiting for me. Behind me, the image shifted again. A clipboard filling the frame. A signature scrawled across the bottom. A. Stevens, Chief Supervisor. Halvorsen was shouting at the technicians, his voice sharp and useless. Cut the feed. CUT it off. But the feed wouldn't stop. The backups were rolling. Leo's encryption was working exactly as planned. The truth had gone viral before anyone could unplug it. I picked up the microphone. My voice came out rough but clear. I am not born in 1959, I said. My words echoed through the hall, over the sobs and whispers. I was photographed and erased in 1962. The crowd froze again. The footage behind me continued to loop, flickering with the flash of another camera, another number tag, another child. I looked down at my trembling hands, one still wrapped around the mic, the other clutching the photograph of the infant in the silver blanket. The same blanket was now visible on the screen. Proof, projected 20 feet high. My name, I said, voice steadier now, wasn't given to me. It was assigned. Reporters shoved through the crowd, cameras raised. Miss Carter, are you saying you're the child in the video? What evidence do you have? Do you realize the implications of this? Halvorsen finally found his voice, face drained of color. This is a grotesque manipulation, he shouted. Fabricated footage. None of this. Fabricated? I turned toward him, still holding the mic. Then why does the lab's project code match the museum's archives? Why does your own staff's signature appear on the paperwork? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence said more than his denial ever could. I took a breath, long and deliberate. Dr. Halvorsen, your institution built a legacy on lies. You called it preservation. I call it possession. You didn't archive history, you kidnapped it. A murmur rippled through the audience. Someone yelled, "Is this true?" Another voice shouted, "Who funded this?" The room was turning. The air buzzed with rage and disbelief. Halvorsen stumbled backward, his hand gripping the podium edge. One of the board members whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the screen, where the words Project, Re, Identity. TEST 12, Subject MC, burned like a wound. Then came the sound, the voice I hadn't heard in decades. From the projector's speakers, faint but distinct, Sister Agnes's tone drifted through the static. Light always finds its way back. The audience fell utterly silent. The footage shifted once more. The girl me sat under the lights, crying silently as hands adjusted her head. A man stepped forward holding a scalpel. He didn't cut her. He just traced a line behind her ear, marking where the skin would be modified for alignment. The audience erupted. Gasps, curses, tears, tears. Halvorsen tried again, shouting, "This is ancient experimentation, unrelated to the museum. It's history, not evidence." I turned to him, eyes burning. "History is evidence," I said. "You just forgot who it belonged to." Security guards moved toward the projector, but Leo's voice crackled through the PA from the control room upstairs. "Good luck finding the off switch," he said. "We mirrored it to every live broadcast. You kill one, 100 more are streaming." The guards froze. Halvorsen looked around, trapped in the glare of his own creation. I could almost pity him. Almost. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. The reporters swarmed, flashes firing. I raised my voice just enough to cut through the noise. They told me I was found near a river on a winter night. They told me I was lucky to be alive. But the truth is, I was never found. I was created. I turned to the crowd, then to the cameras. If history needed a face, I'll give it mine. No Photoshop, no filters, no more ghosts. The applause started hesitantly, one person at the back, then 2, then 10. It wasn't celebration, it was release. Every person who'd ever been lied to, rewritten or forgotten could feel it. The collective exhale of truth finally unspooling. Halvorsen sank into his chair, staring blankly as flashes turned him into a ghost on film. The footage behind me looped once more. The girl, the tag, the scar, then static, then black. The lights came back on, harsh and real. The audience sat stunned in their seats, half of them weeping, the rest too stunned to move. A reporter broke the silence. "What happens now? Ms. Carter?" I looked around the hall. The shattered glass, the toppled chairs, the sea of faces reflecting back fragments of my own. Outside, sirens wailed, growing louder. "Now," I said, "now we stop pretending history is something that happens to other people." Security finally reached the stage. They asked me to step down. I didn't resist. The fight wasn't here anymore. It was already out there in every recording, every copy, every file Leo had scattered across the web. The truth was irreversible now. It had gone viral before they could censor it. As they escorted me out through the side door, I passed by a wall of portraits, the same Women of 1962 exhibit that had started everything. Dozens of framed smiles, all anonymous, all catalogued. But behind the glass, I saw movement, a reflection. For a heartbeat, I could have sworn the young girl in the photograph smiled, not at the camera, but at me. The cold air outside hit like freedom. Police lights painted the museum walls in blue and red, sirens echoing against stone. Reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions I couldn't hear. I turned once more to look back at the building, the place that had tried to own my face, my name, my story. Inside, my projection still flickered across the last of the screens, her image burning into every retina's afterglow. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. They built a legend out of my silence. Now they'll have to live with my voice. That night, the footage played on every major network. Anchors stumbled through the broadcast, unsure whether to call it revelation or scandal. Government spokespeople refused comment. Halvorsen resigned within 24 hours. By morning, Project Re-Identity was the #1 search term in the country. And my face? My unretouched, unaltered, scarred face was on every screen. In the quiet after the storm, I sat in my apartment, lights off, news muted. Leo texted only one sentence. "It worked. They can't bury it now." I replied, "No, they'll have to develop it." I went to the mirror and looked, really looked, at myself. The scar, the wrinkles, the defiance. No filters, No adjustments. This was the first image of me that hadn't been edited by anyone else. By morning, the headlines had multiplied like wildfire. Project Re-Identity exposed. Government inquiry launched. Museum director resigns after scandal. The woman who was erased. Every channel replayed the footage. My face, the girl's face, the way the room gasped. The video looped until even I no longer recognized which one of us was alive. Commentators debated whether I was a whistleblower or an opportunist. Some said hero. Others said hoax. It didn't matter. The truth had escaped the frame. No one could crop it again. The investigation came fast. Federal officials seized the museum's servers, archived every tape. Reporters camped outside my apartment. Leo handled most of them, shielding me with the ferocity of youth. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped watching the news. Instead, I went back to the only place that still made sense, my darkroom. The smell of fixer wrapped around me like memory. The red bulb hummed faintly, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Dust drifted through the beam, tiny galaxies suspended in air. I picked up my old Leica, the one they had broken and I had repaired with tape and stubbornness. Its lens was scratched, but it still caught light. Leo slipped in quietly, holding a newspaper. "You've seen it?" he asked. I shook my head. "I've seen enough versions of myself for one lifetime." He hesitated, watching me remove the lens cap and begin wiping each glass ring with a cotton cloth. "They're asking if you'll sell the rights to the footage." I almost laughed. Sell what was stolen from me? No. Let them copy it if they want. The more copies, the less control anyone has. He leaned against the doorframe. "So what are you going to do now?" I kept cleaning, slow and deliberate. Breathe. Develop. Wait for the light to settle. On the counter lay the last print I'd made. The still frame of the little girl under the lamp, frozen at the moment before the flash. Her eyes wide, mouth open, about to speak. Every time I looked at it, I felt something shift. Pity, maybe. Or forgiveness. Leo broke the silence. "What are you going to do with that photo?" "Leave it," I said. "You're not going to destroy it?" I looked up at him, smiling faintly. "No. It isn't fear anymore. It's proof I existed." For hours we worked in silence, rinsing prints, hanging them to dry. Each photograph dripped quietly into the tray below, like a clock counting breaths instead of seconds. Outside, reporters still shouted my name, but their voices were muffled by concrete walls. In here, there was only the steady rhythm of water and the soft rustle of film. When the last image dried, Leo turned off the bulb. The room went completely dark. For a long moment, I stood there, letting my eyes adjust. The darkness wasn't frightening anymore. It felt honest. Days passed. Investigators called. Officials arrived. I gave my statement once, clearly, and refused interviews after that. Halvorson's name trended for a week, then disappeared. The government promised transparency, which everyone knew meant delay. But somewhere, behind closed doors, people were finally looking into what Project Re-Identity had done. And me? I stayed still. After years of chasing ghosts, I needed stillness like oxygen. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, I sat on my balcony with Leo. We watched the light spill across the city in long gold streaks. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Exposing them like that?" I thought for a long time. No. Regret belongs to the ones who edited the truth, not the one who developed it. He smiled a little. "You sound like a teacher. Maybe I finally became one." We sat there until the light faded and the first street lamps blinked on. For once, no cameras followed us. Just the quiet hum of ordinary life returning. Later that night, back in the darkroom, I opened the drawer where I kept the negatives. I placed the original film of the 1962 experiment beside my own recent self-portrait. 2 frames, 60 years apart, lying side by side. I whispered to them, "You can rest now." Then, I switched off the red bulb. The dark was no longer an enemy. It was a resting place. Soft, clean, real. A year has passed since the night the projector burned truth onto the museum wall. Enough time for the noise to fade, for the world to move on to the next scandal, the next name. But real light doesn't fade. It lingers, waiting to be recalled. I live now on the edge of the city, in a warehouse that once stored printing presses. The windows are tall and imperfect. The sunlight leaks through in fractured shapes like shards of stained glass. I turned the space into a workshop and called it Light Recall Atelier. It isn't just for photographers. Women come here with their faded portraits, their damaged film reels, their old ID cards that no longer match the name in their hearts. I teach them how to restore what's been erased, not by retouching but by revealing. The first rule I tell every student: you don't fix a photo by hiding its cracks. You fix it by showing how the light still found its way through. On the front wall hangs the old Leica scanner, the one that once captured my face in the archives, the one that almost became my tombstone. It's mounted inside a glass frame, the silver body glinting beneath soft illumination. Beneath it, engraved in black metal, "She was captured once. Now she captures truth." Sometimes new visitors think it's a slogan. The regulars know better. It's an epitaph rewritten into a manifesto. The students range from young mothers to retirees. Some lost photos in fires. Some had them confiscated by ex-husbands or by history itself. One woman, Lucille, brought in the only picture of her grandmother. Half burned, the eyes missing. She whispered, "I just want to see her look at me again." I guided her hand as she brushed the dust from the paper, taught her how to hold the image under light until the faint trace of a pupil reappeared. When it did, she cried, not from sadness, but from recognition. It was never about photography. It was about returning faces to names, souls to evidence, truth to the frame. Sometimes, when the room is quiet and the students are bent over their work, I still think about that little girl, the one tagged M. See, I used to think she was me, maybe she still is. But now I understand. She's every woman who's ever been documented before being believed, labeled before being named. I keep her photo in a small wooden box on my desk. Not to mourn her, but to remind myself how far light can travel once it refuses to be owned. One afternoon, while cleaning lenses, I caught my reflection in the glass window. The scar behind my ear was still there, faint but permanent. I touched it gently and smiled. It used to feel like evidence of theft. Now it feels like proof of survival. Leo still visits sometimes. He teaches the younger girls how to digitize negatives, and he laughs too easily for someone who's seen too much truth at once. He tells the students, "You should have seen her that night, standing in front of the projector like a prophet with a camera." I tell him, prophets don't usually get parking tickets for trespassing on museum grounds. He laughs, but when the students leave, he always turns serious. "They're reopening the investigation," he said recently. "Do you want to testify again?" "No," I said. "Let the footage speak." My part's developed. He nodded. He understands that some negatives don't need a second exposure. I get letters now from people I've never met, women who saw the footage and wrote to say they too were once edited out. A teacher who was dismissed for being too outspoken. A nurse whose photo was used in a hospital brochure without permission. A daughter who discovered her mother's name erased from the family tree. They all write the same sentence somewhere in their letters: "You helped me see myself again." I keep those letters in a drawer beside my bed. Sometimes I read them when the world outside feels too quiet. Each one is a reminder that light multiplies when you stop hoarding it. Every Friday evening, I turn off the overheads and let the room glow only from the projectors. The students hang their restored images on the walls: photographs, X-rays, ID cards, whatever truth they've resurrected that week. The walls pulse with ghosts and grace. You can hear the faint click of old shutters replaying themselves, like heartbeats that never stopped. It's the closest thing I've found to prayer. One evening, a young student, a girl barely 20, looked up from her work. She'd been quiet all semester, precise and careful, afraid to make mistakes. She held up a restored photo of her mother, her voice trembling. "Miss Carter," she asked softly, "do you ever get afraid of the light now?" Her question startled me. For a moment I was back in that dark room, in the red glow, afraid of what would emerge. But the fear no longer stung, It felt distant, like an old scar rubbed smooth by time. I smiled. "No," I said. "I'm only afraid of photographs that stop trying to shine." She smiled back, and the projector's light caught her face just right, leaving a faint halo around her hair. For a moment, she looked like every woman who had ever come through this door, broken, restored, luminous. After everyone leaves, I sit alone among the drying prints. The smell of developer lingers, sharp, sweet, honest. Outside, the city hums softly, the sound of cameras, screens, headlines moving on. But in here, time stands still. The photographs breathe. And for once, I don't feel like a ghost inside someone else's frame. I walk to the wall and touch the engraved plate beneath the Lika. She was captured once. Now, she captures truth. Then I switch off the lights. The afterglow stays for a moment. Soft, gold, human. It's enough. Sometimes, before closing up, I project one last image across the far wall, the same footage that once broke the world open. The little girl under the lamp. But this version ends differently. The screen fades not to black, but to a single word in white text. Returned. It's the only edit I ever allowed. The camera is small, old, honest. No filters, no crew, just me and the soft hum of the light. I press the record button. For a moment I can hear my own breathing, the faint rustle of photographs behind me. Then I look straight into the lens. My voice comes out rough but warm, worn at the edges like a favorite photograph. If one day you see your own face in someone else's memory, don't panic. It may not be a trick of time. It might be a message. I pause. The light from the camera blinks, steady, patient. Take the picture again, I say. But this time, make sure it's in focus. Make sure your hand is the one holding the camera. I never wanted to be a symbol. Symbols are easy to print and easier to sell. I only wanted my life back, and somehow it became proof that erasure can be undone. Now, when I speak, I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for recognition. For everyone who's ever been told their version of the story was wrong, their memory unreliable, their reflection not quite right. If someone edited you out of the frame, take the frame back. If someone signed your work, your name, your face, reclaim it. History is full of thieves who think silence is ownership. Don't let them copyright your existence. The red light on the camera wavers. I lean closer. Behind me, the wall of restored photographs glows faintly. Hundreds of women's faces reclaimed by their own hands. The ghosts are gone now. What's left are witnesses. Share this story, I whisper. Not because it's mine, but because it might be yours too. Somewhere, someone is living under a borrowed face, waiting for permission to look in the mirror. The words hang in the air like dust in sunlight. I want them to land softly, but I want them to stay. I think about the girl in the 1962 footage. The one they numbered instead of named. For years, I thought freeing her meant exposing the project, punishing the guilty. But now I know. Freedom began the moment I stopped trying to delete her image. She was never my ghost. She was my origin. Sometimes I imagine her looking back through the camera at me, older, steady, unafraid. I imagine her whispering, "It's your turn to hold the light now." Outside, evening slips through the windows. The city hums, indifferent and alive. I let the camera keep rolling, capturing the quiet, the way the light shifts across my face. No one edits this frame. No one adjusts the exposure. It's the first honest portrait I've ever made. Maybe the past isn't a place we escape, I say softly. Maybe it's a photograph that finally developed when we stopped shaking it. I look directly into the lens one last time. If you've ever been erased, I tell whoever might be watching, write yourself back in. If they took your picture without asking, take another. If they told you who you were, answer with your own name. I reach forward and touch the camera, fingertips smudging the lens, leaving proof of contact, a human fingerprint. Share this story, I say again. Somewhere out there, someone's still living with a borrowed face. The timer on the camera blinks red. I know it's almost full, almost done. I could delete this recording after, but I won't. I smile. Small, real, unposed. It feels strange, using my own expression without permission from anyone else. My story ends here, I say, but maybe this is the first photograph that finally carries my true name underneath. I let the words linger. Then I click the shutter one last time. Light, flash, silence.